If you read his writings on social issues in the 60s, you don't find some rabble-rousing people with the fist in the air. He's saying, contemplate God, God alone, and then live accordingly. And if you live like that, then you've got to be peace in the world. And this was a... so in the 60s, he writes, 1966, Raids on the Unspeakable, Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. Conjectures is the one that has the Fourth and Walnut experience. Raids on the Unspeakable has an essay that begins that book where he's sitting on the porch of his hermitage, because in the 60s, instead of going out in the streets, Merton got permission to have a hermitage built on the property of Gethsemane, and he went there, and I think 64, 65, he moved in. Didn't have air conditioning at first. It was just a brico block, concrete block, that has a front sitting room and desk, rocking chair, fireplace. On the other side of that is a little tiny bedroom with a single bed, a chair. There's a little kitchen turnaround, almost like a trailer kind of kitchen, with a little bathroom, shower, toilet, sink, and then a little altar room where he said daily mass, had prayer, liturgy of the hours, so on. He would still go into the monastery as a short walk, but he's in the woods, and he's so happy. When he moves into this hermitage, he's just so, because the world is just eating at him. They're just wanting everything out of him, and he can't produce all that. He keeps saying he's going to stop writing. He doesn't even want to write anymore. He keeps writing up to the end. He just can't stop, but he doesn't want to anymore. He's having to follow something, but he's not following the world that's pushing and blowing at him. He's really, to me, he's really trying to follow God as best as he can in very tumultuous times. And this is the 60s. But what's so significant is he has come out of a kind of monastic solitude, and he is so completely engaged in the world now, because he really does sense that he's in communion. So all of the fragmentation and social problems, they weigh on his conscience now. He could have he overlooked World War II. That's crazy stuff. I'm going to the monastery. But he can't overlook all this stuff now, because now he's come out. He realizes that his life is tied with everybody else on the planet. He read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring about the use of DDT. She woke up the world in a male-dominated biology world, and spoke, and they poo-pooed her for being a woman scientist. Probably doesn't really know about birds and shells and DDT, but she knew more than anybody else. Merton read that, wrote a little article about that. Said we can't use DDT on plants and flowers. This is killing the wild. Can't do that to God's creation. So almost every issue that we know about in the 60s, he wrote on, including the rising. Remember the Beatles and transcendental meditation and the turn to the east? Well, Merton is doing that, but he's not doing it because it's a popular cultural thing to do. He's doing it because he's actually meeting these people. So he meets Daisette Suzuki, who at that time was about the only Buddhist that America knew. And they wrote each other. They did a book together. He met him, and they had conversations. Some other people did too, as Suzuki kind of moved through the country. And you can see 1964, he's meeting with him. Peace movement leaders come to Gethsemane. The Berrigan brothers, you remember them, whether you like them or you don't. They went to Merton. They treated him as a spiritual advisor. They would love for him to come out and bang on some missiles and planes. But Merton says, that's not what I'm to do. I got to pray. I got to go into this silence. He meets with leaders of women's religion. I was telling you about that a little earlier. He keeps publishing some poetry. His poetry takes off in the 60s. He becomes a new kind of he's finding a different kind of voice. He just keeps on moving. And then he's invited to Bangkok, Thailand, to address some groups. And he went to a couple of different places before that. Talked to some interreligious groupings, some sort of dialogical conferences. And you can find all these recorded in the Asian Journal. It's one of the last books. Came out in the 80s. But that's where he said he was in communion with everybody, but we think we're not. Okay. As all of that is a little bit of background, let's look at the last quote. And then I want you to look at the poem by Merton, and then I'll see if I can't summarize things. The Conference for Liberation. The solution of the problem of life is life itself. Life is not attained by reasoning and analysis, but first of all by living. When I am liberated by silence, when I am no longer involved in the measurement of life, but in the living of it, I can discover a form of prayer in which there is effectively no distraction. My whole life becomes a prayer. My whole silence is full of prayer. The world of silence in which I am immersed contributes to my prayer. The unity which is the work of poverty and solitude draws together all the wounds of the soul and closes them. Now let me say parenthetically, he experienced this. So he's not saying, here's some, like a Hallmark card. Here's, let's say some contemplative things. Best wishes, contemplative. This is coming out of him. So when he says the unity which is the work of poverty, he knows poverty. And in solitude draws together all the wounds of the soul and closes them. He knows about the wounds of his own soul. He has gone down to where those wounds are. He knows about, he called silence healing. That silence was a healing silence. As long as we remain poor, as long as we are empty and interested in nothing but God, we cannot be distracted. And he means distracted in particular ways, you'll see here next. For our very poverty prevents us from being pulled apart. He's not talking about distraction the way we were talking centering prayer and meditation, distracting with our thoughts. Kathy's exactly right. You're meditating like a stream. These thoughts are like leaves. They fall in the stream. They just keep on going. You just stay with that. He's talking about distraction to where your very being is pulled apart, where you are pulled apart. And you can't, in the world, pull yourself together. You can't recollect yourself. God can recollect yourself. And in this silence where the soul is healed, where it's open and where it's healed, where there's poverty, where you have no concepts or structures to rely on, it's here where you're not being pulled apart. There's a rest here, and this is why I want to read Augustine. You pray best when the mirror of your soul is empty, when it's not reflecting everything that's going on in the world. Soul is empty of every image except the image of the invisible Father. Well, that's a beautiful phrase. God is invisible. We're made in the image of the invisible Father. You can't conceptualize that. There's something still about that. There's something silent about that. There's something solitary about that. The greatest of God's secrets is God Himself. When this is learned, when our love of other people becomes pure and strong, or then our love of others becomes pure and strong, we can go out to them without vanity and without complacency, loving them with something of the purity and gentleness and hiddenness of God's love for us. Now he's writing about that in the 50s, but that gets super traction in the 60s, because everybody's wanting him to come out of that silence, and wanting him to talk, lambast all the evils in the world, blast his way through society and create a new monastic revolution. That's not silence. That's not the silent way. I can't hear God if I become a loudspeaker for every movement and organization. You're not listening to me. One theologian once said, "You're an Augustinian, aren't you, Merton?" Because Augustine understood this. Augustine, very much like Merton, in his Confessions, had a sordid life. But one of the beautiful things about this, worth rereading if you've read it before, is Augustine sensed at the beginning of his life that God was already leading him. This is why I want to kind of make an argument that we're contemplative from the very beginning of our life. And that grows and that matures. And our action is our responsiveness to the reception of God's life, which is already given as soon as we're born. We're already given this life. And then our life keeps being given to us. And who we are keeps being given to us. And we keep discovering who we are as it keeps growing, and it's the same person, but it's the person God made. And it takes us a while to get away from all of our fiddling around with this. You can't rest until you find God, for Augustine. He says this is in book 4, chapter 12. It's called Loving Things in God, according to this edition. I think it's an astounding chapter, but just one little paragraph. To what purpose would you stubbornly continue to tread those hard and toilsome ways? He's referring to a verse in the book of Wisdom. To what purpose would you stubbornly continue to tread those hard and toilsome ways? Rest is not where you seek it. Seek what you are seeking, but it's not to be found where you are seeking it. You seek for a happy life in the land of death, but it is not there. For how can there be a happy life where there is no life? For Merton, he had to find his life, and of course, in classic terms, he had to lose his life. And then he found his life. He found the life of his life, and there's where rest is. And right when he comes to that rest, the 60s kind of wake up and go, hey, well, we got some things over here to do. It's a little too late. He's understood something. He's experientially. Augustine is telling us, seek what you're seeking. If you're seeking God, well, seek God. Don't seek something else. Well, that's kind of a loaded phrase, because everybody who's seeking God would say, well, what do you think I'm seeking? I'm seeking God. Well, then why are you not seeking God? It's kind of like when you pray, listen to God. Don't listen to yourself. Don't listen to other people. Listen for God. Wait until you hear. Well, I'm listening, but I don't hear anything, so I'll have to fill in, or I'll have to come up with something else. And we're afraid to kind of endure. That's the breaking through. It's like there's our noise, and then there's our anxiety to keep talking. That kind of ruins our silence. It's almost as if we haven't gone through it enough, deeply enough, and we got the rest of our life to keep doing this, to where we actually really do start to hear something, but maybe not the way we think we're going to hear something. We're always kind of thinking ahead. And we're planners. We're controllers.